Now, let's not pull the curtain down completely, but I may have had one of my last major loadouts of physical material in which I play a major part in being one of the people doing the actual physical part. This is Jason Scott Talks His Way Out of It, a podcast about technology, history, and getting myself out of debt. Thanks to Jeff Atwood, Daniel Boyd, and the hundreds of other supporters on Patreon and elsewhere who have been supporting me and helping me get out of debt. The actual material involved is not important, but it is interesting. There was a collection that somebody was keeping up in New Hampshire, and because it wasn't indexed, a number of establishment libraries and archives just weren't interested in taking it. It was just too much work to deduplicate, figure out what they had, what they didn't have, and what they would take. And so a group of people who admired this collection and knew it was special reached out to me, knowing that I wouldn't be stopped by a non-indexed collection of something interesting. And it is interesting. It's a very, very large collection of science fiction fanzines, specifically erotic science fiction fanzines. Not just a handful, something north of 2,500 individual issues from the 1970s up through the early 2000s. These represent a heart, a center of slash fiction, named because in the stories they pair up romantically various people who may or may not have had relationships in the original works. So they are adding Kirk/Spock, or Doctor Who/anybody, or any other combination you can imagine. These fanzines were published in the way that all zines were, by hand, with great care by thoughtful people who had things they wanted to express, either as editors, writers, artists, or organizers. What's striking, once you look at this whole genre, is that after a few giggles, you realize how much work people put into what they were doing. The writing, the illustration style, the layout, using very crude editorial tools to be able to provide page after page of writing, all of it bound in 8x11 sheets of paper. And when I say organizers, I mean these magazines were often the launching pad for a variety of science fiction conventions, and in some cases providing the proof to executives and film companies that it was worth making more movies with these properties. They are, in other words, a vital part of science fiction, fantasy, detective, and other genre works. Plus, as I discovered when I was led into the barn with all of these pieces, it's an impressive body of work just to gaze upon. 2,000 plus fanzines is a lot of paper. It's a lot of writing, many of them in the dozens or hundreds of pages, provided at relatively small print runs, and, in some cases, extraordinarily rare. If you feel the need to justify having a collection like this, and I hope that people who hear what I talk about don't feel that need, in many cases, early works by artists and writers who went on to full professional careers and worldwide fame got their start writing for fanzines and amateur magazines. This is where you see the first halting steps of a creative person's career, including mine. I didn't write for any erotic fanzines, but I certainly did cartoons and drawings for places like Factsheet 5, as well as doing my own work inspired by others within Factsheet 5. That's where my graphic artwork began. The collector of all these materials was now old enough where she couldn't dream of going through all of them, indexing and providing lists, only then to be told what was acceptable for them to mail in. That was not going to happen, and they were certainly fearing that they would have to throw it all out. My arriving into the mix, thanks to the work of Morgan Dawn, meant that not only did she see me as a lifesaver, I was almost too good to be true. The fact that somebody would appear at your barn and take everything and not charge you a dime for the privilege seemed just too perfect for what she was hoping would happen. And on my way north, trying to arrive as early as possible so that I could mail things out via FedEx before the end of day, I reached out on Twitter, and to my saving grace came Lodrina. Lodrina was a very old friend from the Boston area who had some experience with lifting and transport and was able, when she arrived, to give me that extra muscle that I desperately needed. 2,000 to 3,000 issues is a lot of issues. We didn't have time to do a full count. We had to move. I had brought 40 boxes, of which it turned out about 15 or 20 were the right size for these sort of papers. I ended up having to go to a Home Depot and buying even more medium-sized, heavy-duty boxes, which, while wonderful for what I needed, were also very heavy and a lot of things to put into one box. Between chatting with the owner, making boxes, filling them, and transporting them to our cars, Lodrina and I spent hours doing all of this work. I paused where I could to take photos of unusual or interesting covers just to show the kind of things we were doing, to maybe inspire others who found out this was happening to look into their own collections of materials and contact me. But mostly, this was a lot of lifting. Ultimately, 22 smaller boxes and 13 large boxes were transported to the nearest FedEx shipping center and sent out. Thanks to FedEx, I know that it was 1,550 pounds of fanzines. 1,550 pounds. It didn't take too long for me to feel winded and a little bit sore, but Lodrina was a champ and helped push me all the way through the end. We were able to complete this task and get these shipped to Internet Archive storage within one day. Powered by energy drinks and just the will to survive, we got to the end. I'm happy to say the boxes made it to their destination with minimal damage. A few crushed corners on the boxes, not affecting the stacks within. The material was utterly safe. It rests now in a physical archive, awaiting for me and hopefully a team of accompanying people to do that indexing and deduplication that needs to be done. But that's not where my adventure has stopped. The next day, I felt a little sore. That happens all the time. But a week later, I moved a couple boxes around in my office. Very small boxes, just transporting them between storage and to my office to work on them. And the next day, I couldn't get out of bed. A searing pain was in my lower left back, feeling like I couldn't move at all without losing consciousness. It felt terrible. Not just a minor, small ache, but a fundamental break in the structure of my back. It felt like I'd really hurt something. I took some anti-inflammatories that I've always had around for my gout. I went back to bed and, taking advice of others, I iced it, lay on it, and slept a lot. But in the days hence, it's clear I have crossed a threshold. I've lost one of the tools that I used to have on hand when I fell into these adventures. The ability, when time called for it, to throw my body at the problem. I think that is gone. I can probably buffer it a little bit with a back brace or being intensely careful how I lift certain kinds of boxes. But it's very clear to me that the trend is here. I will need assistance. More than just scheduling and making myself available, I will need to round up people, paid or otherwise, to do the lifting for me. It's hard to come to terms when you're at the end of something, but my physical ability to lift things for hours on end with the purpose of hitting a certain deadline is basically over. The main difference going forward is that processes will cost more. Instead of taking one day, I'm probably going to have to take 2 and find a hotel. Instead of doing it alone for free or with a friend, I'm probably going to have to hire lifters to move the boxes. And when it comes to finding the time, I can't push myself with hours and hours of driving back and forth, eating up the entire waking period sitting in one place in my car, trying to make a made-up personal deadline. I suppose I should feel more sad, but if I hadn't gotten all of the things done that I have through my life and realized how much good I did with the amount of energy I had, I'd probably feel pretty bad indeed. But I did what I could with what I had. It's a matter of coming to terms with what you can do and what you can't. In my 50s, lifting seems to have dropped off the list. Even as I'm recording this, I'm standing up and I'm telling you, it's not a joy. It's going to be a while before I can feel 100% again. And I'm going to realize at that moment that I don't want to slide that health onto the roulette table and take a spin. So let's celebrate where we are now. Once again, a collection that was at extraordinary risk is now saved. It will be looked through, indexed, deduplicated, transferred to other collections if there's doubles, and then another team will contact the creators to see if they can all be digitized and put online. Whatever comes of it is going to be great. These are breathtaking amounts of work in these pages. And it turned out it was a breathtaking amount of work to save them. This is Jason Scott Talks His Way Out of It. Thanks to James Bekoyanu, Mark Pilgrim, Emilio Oliveira, Ernie Hershey, Michael Rubin, Craig Talbert, Dilip Reddy, Sean Kelly, Trixie the Cat, John Sturm, Martin, Symbionts, Eugene, and Anonymous, along with the hundreds of other supporters on Patreon and elsewhere who have been supporting me and helping me get out of debt. One other important point here. I will be seeing a doctor about how I am. A few years back, I got into a car accident, and the fact that I was able to drive away from it meant that I didn't pay much attention to whatever had happened from the seatbelt hitting my chest at 25 miles an hour. I suspect I've done something in there, and I don't want that to happen with the rest of me. So don't worry, I'll be looked after, I'll be taken care of, and I guess I'm going to have to relax with some pretty spicy reading.